the MP for Rutherglen and Hamilton West. Well, Tom Greatrex, do you believe there's something different about the Labour Party of Ed Miliband compared to the Labour parties of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown?
Gordon, I haven't been around quite as long as George in terms of going to Labour Party conferences. I think the first one I went to was in 1992, and so I've been at a few and I've seen a few leaders' speeches, and I think Ed, and one of the reasons I voted for him as leader of our party back in 2010, I think has a gift in being able to communicate with people that sometimes doesn't always come through, and there's a big challenge still to meet. But I think I'm very, very comfortable with the way the Labour Party under Ed Miliband is going.
If you were asked to explain to someone what the difference was between the Labour Party as it is now and New Labour in terms of its politics and its policies, as opposed to whether or not you think Ed Miliband makes good speeches, what would you say?
Well, I mean, I think we've seen through the course of the conference this week, and people have been critical of saying that we haven't had many policies. We've seen quite a few policies this week, and the policies that are focused on this important point that Ed was making today about the relationship and the breaking of the relationship between the standard of living of people and the growth in the economy, and that's something which he's absolutely determined to address. That's a crucial long-term project for the Labour Party and for the country, and that's something which I'm very, very pleased to see and to hear that Ed's addressing and the Labour Party is addressing. I think that's crucial and the key to Labour's success at forthcoming electoral tests.
Well, bring us the benefits of the comparative youth you've already alluded to on another question. Even a decade ago, Labour were the dominant political force in Scotland. They pretty much ran everything from local authorities upwards. Now, Labour still obviously did very well in the general election here, but clearly it's a bit of a busted flush when it comes to Scottish elections. What is your explanation for why the fall of Labour in Scotland has been so hard?
Well, I mean, the election that I stood at in 2010 and in my constituency, along with a number of others, there was a significant swing to the Labour Party. And then obviously in the election the year after, there was a very, very different result. And but the year after that, again, in terms of local government elections, I think Andrew wasn't quite correct in terms of the number of Labour authorities, even under STV, that are under Labour overall control. South Lanarkshire, my own authority, is now under overall control. So there's at least 3. I think there may be more. So you know the fortunes have fluctuated at different elections. I think though there's an issue here around what happened in 2011 that Joanne Lamont has been very clear about seeking to address, and that's that's where we need to get back into a position of being seen as being
but what
a
is the issue? What is your explanation for why that happened?
Well, I think for a number of reasons, we weren't in a position where people saw us as being in the context of voting for a devolved government in the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood for being the best choice. And I think we've got a lot of work still to do to get to that position. But Joanne's doing a lot of that work and working closely with her team in Holyrood and the Labour team at Westminster to demonstrate that it's not just about Labour's not only interested in Westminster, we're interested in representing people in the Scottish Parliament and being a good government at Scottish government level, as well as seeking to be a government at UK level.
You would concede that Labour came over as perhaps not as interested in running Scotland as it was in running the UK? Well,
I think there's a different dynamic at each of those elections in Scotland, and that was a contributor to the results and the difference in the results in 2010 and 2011. But yeah, I mean, I'll be completely frank about it. In 2011, we did not have, and I was involved in part of it, so I take my share of responsibility. We did not have a good campaign. We did not set out as an effective platform as we could or should have done.
Rightly or wrongly, that Labour were the establishment in Scotland, and that your party just felt it had some sort of entitlement to run the place. That was surely one of the problems.
Well, I think, yeah, and I think no political party, should ever get into the position of feeling and seeming as though they can just take voters for granted, because you can't, and that's part of the lesson that we've been learning in Scotland, and that's something which perhaps the SNP might have to learn in terms of the forthcoming or the next Scottish Parliament election
really,
as well.
Do you think, been eliminated? I mean, even at this Labour conference, there's been a bit of a a whiff of that. Margaret Curran made a speech in which she said if Scotland becomes independent, it would break up the British Labour Party, and Alex Salmond shouldn't be allowed to do that. Now, perhaps that comes over in a way she didn't intend, but the way I think it comes over is it's just out of touch, is that Labour's obsessed with the Labour Party and not with the people who didn't vote for it in the last Scottish election.
Well, no, I don't think that's quite fair. I think the point that Margaret was making is that there are lots of things that bind us together across the UK, and the Labour Party is obviously a UK-wide party, and that, you know, the consequence of Scotland being a separate state is that we're in a position where that would be different. But, you know, this is about how we can properly address the issues that are of concern to my constituents and I'm concerned about, not just in Scotland but across the whole of the UK. And there's some big issues. There are, you know, there's a conceit sometimes that somehow Scotland is all exactly the same and Scotland is absolutely different from other places in the UK. I would say that, you know, my constituency, for example, has lots of similarities to places in the northeast of England, share a lot of the same issues to deal with in terms of public sector issues, and you know, even climatically it's very similar. So you shouldn't sort of draw those false boundaries and barriers.
Right, but there is an issue of tone, isn't there? I mean, again, Joanne Lamont's speech at conference, she referred to Scottish nationalism as a virus. Now, that's not a very pleasant thing to say. Obviously, you disagree with the Scottish nationalists, but I mean, can you imagine if Margaret Thatcher had said she wanted to defeat Labour to get rid of the virus of socialism back in the 1980s? You would have been screaming, and your party would have been screaming blue murder. It's not a very constructive way to engage in a debate, is it?
Well, the point that Joan was making, I think it was absolutely a valid point to make, is that nationalism is about by identifying politics by identity, and it's not about the issues. And that's, I think, is a perfectly valid point for Joanne to be able to make, and she made it during her speech.
To describe a tendency which has just thumped you in a Scottish election as a virus, it goes to this idea that Labour doesn't quite get it. Labour just doesn't quite understand why it's lost here, and is deeply resentful and holds deep animosity towards the people who beat them. I mean, you wouldn't describe conservatism as a virus, would you?
Well, I would describe conservatism as something which is deeply divisive, and something which we don't want to see and we don't think is good in terms of representing our communities. And I would describe nationalism in the same way. I don't think it's about progressive politics in any way, shape or form. I think it's about politics of identity, and by defining people against others. And that, in the end, is a politics which isn't really about people's ideas and about looking after and nurturing communities. It's actually about politics of identity, and I don't think that is something which we should seek to.
I'm just curious as to which side of a line you would be on. There are, as you know, some people in the Labour Party in Scotland who believe it should come up with some radical new proposals for more devolution, that would be a way of winning the independence referendum. There are others who say, look, come on, that's just more sops to nationalism. Actually, we should stake our ground on very different territory and talk about social problems and all the rest of it. Which side of that line are you on? Well,
what I believe fundamentally is that the Labour Party should be about decentralising power, and that's not just about devolving to Holyrood in Scotland or to Cardiff in Wales. It's also about decentralising power in England and across the UK as well, and that's something which is much more of a sort of a patchwork effect than simply having a sort of very neatly defined sort of federal structure. And I think that's where the Labour Party as a whole needs to go. And actually, it maybe didn't get much attention for obvious reasons in Scotland, but Hilary Benn made a speech earlier on today at conference where he was talking about devolving and decentralising power within England on issues around transport and economic development and other things. And I think that's what our party should be about. It should be actually about decentralising power as far as you can do so, but working within the framework of the United Kingdom, where we can pool and share our risks and resources, because that's the best way of being able to achieve both those things and to be able to do the best for the communities across the whole of the UK.
All right, Tom Greatrex, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.